This video is sponsored by Hellofresh.
So this is the second part of the 5-day boat build where I joined Jason Hibbs of Bourbon Moth down in Oregon to build a cocktail racer style speedboat in only 5 days. We don't have any plans and we have very little boat building experience. When we left off, it was the end of day 3. So far we've cut out all the ribs, added in some chines, the keel, not the spine, thank you everyone in the comments, and we've cut out the cockpit. Both of us know that if we don't have the boat together by the end of the day on day 5, we won't have enough time to apply finish, and that finish won't have enough time to dry so that we can get it in the water before I have to head home. Fair warning, if you are a boat builder, boat enthusiast, or anyone who knows more about boats than me and Jason, which I imagine is quite a few out there, you may have to look away at certain sections of this video because honestly, we were just moving as fast as we could and making decisions just as quick. Main thing was just to get the boat done in 5 days.
Day 4 was all about skinning the boat in 1/4-inch plywood. And I will say that this was the most nervous we were about anything in the whole project, just because we'd spent 3 days up to this point lining everything up and guessing at the sort of skeleton of the boat. But there was a good chance that it just wasn't gonna work and then the plywood is gonna buckle in weird spots.
We are a little shy on the bottom.
Right off the bat, we missed our measurements on the port side of the boat.
We got it up above. We don't have it here or there. Dang it.
Fortunately, we flipped it over to the starboard side and managed to get enough out of the plywood to just barely make it on that side. So we traced it out from the back and cut it out with a jigsaw. Using the now starboard panel as our template, we could then cut out the port side again, and this time leaving a little bit extra room so that we don't mess it up again. After making sure that the sides fit real nice, we laid on another sheet of 1/4-inch plywood and traced it out for the deck. We wanted to do this now because once those panels start going on, it's going to get harder and harder to trace this out. We could then start gluing on the panels, and for the glue up, we're using Total Boat Thixo. This is a 2-part thickened epoxy that mixes in the tube, and it's literally the only reason we were able to get this boat done this quickly. If we had been standing around mixing up pots of thickened epoxy, this would have just taken forever. We also, to speed up the process, ran behind and started nailing off all of the panels. We used a staple nailer for this, and I know this isn't traditional to boat building, but again, we're just trying to move as fast as possible. So once we got one panel done, we glued on the other panel and started removing the clamps almost immediately. We left the panels a little bit wide because we knew that it'd be pretty quick to just go back over the top of them with a templating bit and a palm router.
You roll it so light. And there's Thixo all over my ship.
After flipping the boat over, I scraped off all the excess Thixo while Jason went behind with the palm router. We could get close to these edges, but since they're beveled, I had to touch them up with the palm sander as well. We learned our lesson from the first panels not to just go for it on the first try, so for For the bottom pieces, we just took a piece of scrap. It's actually the layout panel that we used before. And we tried a bunch of different things. What ended up working really well was a laser level to get this straight line across the front. Because when it's unfolded, it's curved. When it's laid down, it needs to be straight. And this got us right in the ballpark so we could trim it out with the jigsaw. And now we had a template that we could use for the actual panels. This first bottom panel turned out to be kind of a challenge to get to lay down. It really didn't want to sit flat, especially on the bow. It wanted to tear the staples clean out of it, so we ended up having to resort to screws.
Should try and put a screw in there.
I think you're gonna have to do something. I'm just curious what's going on the opposite side.
Or do we let it be
and then just
fill it with thick sew and just bring the other one to that? Because that's where
too.
it wants to be.
I mean, that's gonna be super strong just from its own tension.
I mean, I could bring it down a little bit.
I'm kind of inclined to agree with
Just
you.
leave it.
Leaving it and then trim to it.
It was at this moment that we coined the term the Fixo Fixo. We did this a lot throughout the boat. Fixo came to the rescue, just filling in those gaps that, are a result of imperfectly building a boat in 5 days. In an effort to stabilize the cross braces in the boat, we ended up stapling through the bottom of the boat, which worried both of us that it might leak, but we didn't really have much of a choice, and we came back and backfilled it with more epoxy to hopefully prevent anything from happening. We still had the template from making the first bottom panel, so we just decided to flip it over and test it out to see if it would fit. Had no idea how symmetrical this boat really is, but we were actually pretty surprised that it was really close. So all we did was we cut an oversized panel, slightly oversized, and went ahead and glued it on. We knew that the bow was going to give us trouble just based on the first one, and trying to get that line in the center to meet up, it wasn't really working.
We're gonna sand it down anyway.
Sand it out!
Dude. Oh, that's so light.
About halfway through day 4, we were in good shape. We had the outer skin all laid out, and it was looking like a real boat.
Now we're at the stage from the photo that we were copying.
Yeah! We made it!
Nice work.
Before moving on, let's quickly thank our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Hellofresh. Hellofresh is an online meal delivery service that makes cooking at home fun, easy, and affordable. Ashley and I both love to cook, but we've found that when we're left to our own devices, we just make the same things over and over again. We started using Hellofresh to shake things up a bit, and it worked. In fact, we signed up for the veggie plan because we wanted to learn some more vegetarian recipes. Tonight I'm making black bean and Poblano burritos. I've never made anything with Poblano peppers before, and that's what I like about Hellofresh, is that they make it easy to test out new ingredients. All the ingredients come to your door pre-portioned, meaning that there's less prep and less food waste. You can choose the number of people you're cooking for and how many recipes you want per week. There's a bunch of options like quick and easy, pescatarian, and calorie smart. Every meal we've tried so far has been delicious, and it's made meal planning super simple. If you want to order HelloFresh delivered to your home, use code ALMFAB14 for up to 14 free meals across your first 5 HelloFresh boxes, plus free shipping. Thanks, HelloFresh. Now back to the build. Back at the boat, we started working on the old Thixo Fixo again. There were definitely some gaps in the ribs just because we kind of guessed at the shape of them. They weren't too far off, but definitely the Thixo added a little bit of extra strength in there. At this point, we considered putting the deck on, but we realized that there was so much to do to clean up the bottom that we just focused on that for the rest of the night. Jason ran around with the trim router, and I ran around with the sander, sanding off any excess glue. We also filled a lot of the holes with wood filler and started making the trim for the boat. We know that there's going to be a lot of trim on this boat, and the trim sort of functions as an extra layer of protection from leaks and stuff. So we had a bunch of mahogany that we just trimmed down, and this actually took quite a bit of doing. Jason worked on designing this multi-part piece of mahogany that would go over the front as like a bow stem, and this covered up all of those weird gaps and stuff, and we glued it up with Thixo, taped it out, let it dry, and then once it was dry enough, we bent it over that curve and nailed it on with a 23 gauge nailer. We didn't want to use really big nails at this point because, again, we're trying to fill the holes, not make more of them. I went back over the top of that with basically a bead of caulk with the Thixo, smoothed it out, and then we could add a few more pieces of trim before calling it a night. Day 5 is the last build day, and Jason and I were super tired at this point. We've been working for 4 days straight, staying up super late just to get this far, and we knew that if we didn't get it done by the end of the day today, that we wouldn't have enough time to put finish on it, and if we didn't have enough time for finish, it wouldn't dry in time to put the motor on and all that, and it basically just wouldn't get done. So this was the crunch day, and we just had to work until we were done. So we started off by soaking the inside of the boat with some teak oil. This is just in case water gets inside. We only got one coat on, but it was better than nothing. This is the last chance that we have to actually reach up inside of the boat before we put the deck on. We rough trimmed the deck using a jigsaw and those measurements that we took earlier when the boat wasn't all glued together. And that was enough to get us into the ballpark. Again, we're going to use the trim router on this, and that is going to just allow us to have a little bit of flexibility on it. So the plywood that we're using on this build is called Okume plywood. It's made by Tiger Ply, and it was donated to us from the Hardwood Center in Albany, Oregon. This is a marine grade plywood. It's perfect for this style build. It also looks like mahogany, so it's going to match our mahogany trim, which we also got from the Hardwood Center. If you're in the Willamette Valley area, go check them out. They're super nice people, and they have a great selection. Since we're not going to add any trim to the top of the deck, we wanted it to look really nice, but we also knew that we had to add staples to it. So we came up with this idea of me drawing out each individual staple, and then Jason following up behind me and firing them into the marks that I had made. This ended up looking actually pretty nice. It kind of is a stitched effect across the top of the boat. So I'd say at this point, it's probably around 5 or 6 o'clock. We still have to eat dinner, and then we've got to trim out the bottom of the boat too. So we're getting pretty tired, and honestly, we're running out of time. So you can see that the trim is just not going to be perfect. This boat just is not going to be perfect. Jason and I are starting to accept that, but we're doing the best that we can with the time that we have. And you know what? Honestly, I think we did a pretty solid job considering. One of the hardest pieces of trim to add in was right here on the bow, and it was just a weird shape that we just basically traced out and made in multiple pieces. I mean, if we could steam bend something or had the time to really put into this, we would have, but we started to have to make sacrifices, and you know what? Ultimately, it's a 5-day boat build.
Alright, put that back where you want it. Is that...
By about 11 o'clock at night, we had all the trim on the boat, and we were completely fried. But we had one last thing that we needed to do before going to bed, and that was to get this little bow ring on the front of the boat so that we can hang the boat up and finish it tomorrow.
Come out the bottom. To wipe the wood and the thing up over.
Well, it's day 6, and I think we have a boat built in 5 days. There's still sanding and finish work and all sorts of other stuff to do. But we hit our goal. We hit our mark of getting it ready for finish before the end of the day. Once we got it sanded up, it actually turned out looking pretty good.
You ready?
Yeah, that bow looks so awesome. We figured the only way that we were going to get a bunch of coats of finish on this is if we suspend it from the ceiling. So Jason put some hooks in the ceiling and we attached some ratchet straps to it. Again, this is why we needed that loop in the front of the bow. And then once it was hanging up, we could just slide the table out from underneath and get ready to start finishing.
And wad it into like a loose ball like this.
Okay.
And then every time it starts to get dirty.
Using some tack cloth, we went over the surface of the entire boat to pull off as much of the sawdust as we could. And then we started prepping our varnish. We're using the Total Boat Lust varnish on this. Like this stuff a lot because it's got a very quick dry time, which we need because we want to get at least 5 coats on this boat today. We thinned out just the first coat of it, which was recommended by the manufacturer, and then we went over the boat. I started by laying it on with a roller, and then Jason tipped it off with a natural bristle brush.
My neck's gonna be.
After a couple hours, we were able to knock back the finish with a little bit of sandpaper and then go over it again. After this point, we didn't knock it back again. We just kept layering finish over the top of finish. Every racing boat needs to have some sort of graphic on it, and Jason designed this real quick one morning while we were working, and I was just really excited to put it on. It was late, I was tired, but this kind of gave me a little bit more energy to apply the graphic. Kind of tied the whole boat together, talking about what we should name it. We settled on the Old Fashioned because Jason's bourbon moth, and we both really like whiskey and old fashions, and the type of boat is a cocktail racer. So it all just came together at once, and I'm super happy with this. It was nerve-wracking putting it on because it was kind of a one and done. We had a couple wrinkles in it, but for the most part, I think it just came out awesome. We wanted to get the graphic on just before our final coat so that we could just encase it in that varnish, and it just adds that little extra bit to just tie the whole boat together. I can hear the comments. I've been reading the comments. Where's the pattern plywood? So I got up really early the next morning after we were varnishing until I think 2 o'clock in the morning. I got up at 6 and I started making pattern plywood with the scrap Akume plywood that we had left over. I couldn't leave it alone. There had to be some pattern plywood in this almost entirely plywood boat, and I decided to shake it up a little bit. I decided to do a pattern that I kind of have done before, but I kind of haven't. I wanted this pattern to look somewhat like waves, and I also wanted to incorporate the mahogany so that it kind of had this classic look to it. So I used a couple strips of the Akume plywood and then added in a mahogany strip, a couple more strips of Akume, mahogany strip, and until I got 3 mahogany strips in the center of 5 sort of sandwiched glue-ups of plywood. After that, Jason joined me in the shop and we got back to working on the boat.
Hour and a half?
How's it look?
It's pretty good. I mean, you can definitely see some stuff.
A big part of this day is just setting up all the mechanical elements of this boat. And I wanted to give a shout out to my brother Keith, who was essentially on speed dial the entire time because he knows way more about boats than either Jason or I do, and he answered how to get this steering mechanism to work and basically where to start with setting it up so that the outboard motor turns left and right with a steering wheel. So thank you, Keith. That's the whole reason that we were able to do this. The steering mechanism came with instructions, but we had to modify them quite a bit because our boat's a lot smaller than most boats.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah,
If you missed the first video, we bought an outboard motor off of Amazon. This was the only one that could get it to us in time. It said it was a 3.6 horsepower, and when we got it, it said something different on top.
This says 4 horsepower on the top.
And it's a 4 horsepower.
In order to mount the steering mechanism, Jason made up this little bracket. It's basically just 2 C-clamps on like a little ledger, and this is just going to hold that metal rod, which is going to control the left-right motion of the motor as you turn the wheel. We installed it and very quickly realized that we installed it a little too close to the starboard side of the boat. So we ended up loosening it up, shifting it over, but it worked out great.
Alright. Cool. You want to drill a hole in that plate and get that mounted?
The plate that Jason is talking about is something that my brother warned us of, is that there's no central mounting point to this motor, which means that there's no way for us to connect the steering mechanism directly to the motor, so we need to fabricate something. Jason doesn't have any metal shop tools in his shop, no welders or anything like that, but he does have Justin from Rainfall Projects just down the street. So we made a template in Jason's shop and brought it over to Justin and inconvenienced him a little bit. Thank you, Justin, for knocking this out. We were obviously very tired at the time. and he was gracious enough to give us a couple beers and just weld this thing up. Justin has an amazing YouTube channel. I found out about him through the Winter Garden channel. He made parts of the Marble Machine X. He's a really impressive welder, and this is definitely below his pay grade.
Even a little inaccurate on the cuts there.
Well, I just did it with the bandsaw really quick.
That looks great.
Just had to get over that.
Clean up a little bit of that stuff.
And then will you powder coat that for us?
Yeah, sure.
Back at the shop, Jason started working with the bracket that Justin made for us, and I went back to the pattern plywood. I had to get this stuff knocked out inside of this day. It's definitely one of the fastest pattern plywood panels I've ever made, but I'm really happy with the results. Jason suggested that I use his Capex, which is not a tool that I have in my shop, and I will say that it was really convenient for cutting these angles. You'll also notice that I'm cutting it at a 30-degree angle rather than my usual 45. This is going to give it more of that natural wave-like pattern that I'm looking for. It's really cool. I might do some more of these 30-degree patterns in the future. I sanded off all the glue squeeze out, and then I could use a template that I pulled off of the dashboard of the boat to trace out my lines so that I know where I want to cut. I then used the track saw to cut a flat edge that I could reference against on the table saw, then use the table saw to cut the opposing side. Once those were cut, I could start resawing it, and fortunately I had enough that if something went wrong, I'd have actually two panels. It's easier to glue them up thicker early on and then cut them down, and I've found that resaw panels are actually surprisingly strong. The dashboard required a very specific sized hole, so I used this adjustable hole saw from Rockler. This worked like a charm, but it was terrifying. Terrifying. Honestly surprised that this panel did not explode in the drill press. I then could start trimming it out on the bandsaw. I was really careful with this. I trimmed a little bit away from my line, and then I could sand it up to fit later. Since the dashboard had already been varnished, we decided on Thixo. We did sand the dashboard a little bit just to get that varnish knocked back, but the Thixo was definitely the right call. We laid it into place, and I checked the fit beforehand to make sure that it was nice and tight. And then we could nail it into place with a couple strategically placed 23 gauge nails.
So trying to figure out what line would be the most.
Probably the mahogany.
Float at 630.
Yeah, let's.
That's probably good, I'd say.
Yeah.
You can put that little cap in the steering wheel.
So if you want to see how Jason assembled this full steering mechanism, you're probably going to have to go to his channel because I was too busy making pattern plywood to film all of it, but I'm sure he's going to detail it completely in his video. So after you watch this video, go and check his out. At this point, we were down to all the little tiny details, things like handrails and deck boards. We found these really cool handrails at West Marine, which I think made the boat look way, way cooler. And also the deck boards we ended up putting in are all mahogany. They're left over from all the trim boards. We had just enough to make this work, and I trimmed them out really nicely with a round over bit, so they looked professional. We also used finish washers to drill them down to the deck and hit them with a little bit of teak oil too.
For example, in my boat, I teak oil the inside and all the pieces with 8 coats of teak oil.
Not one? And it will not surprise you at this point, we are completely running out of time. The last thing that I had to do was apply a coat of finish to the pattern plywood. Unfortunately, I only got one coat on this. I would have loved to get 5 or 6 because I think it would start turning all iridescent, but it still looked pretty darn good.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
What time is it? Can I get in it?
Not yet, bud.
It floats. There it is.
Is that hot there? Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah, go for it. Yeah. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. That looks amazing. It looks good. This is top speed. Let me give you a push before you throttle it. I don't want to drop it more. You can throttle pretty quick. It is probably better.
So the boat performs great, except for it's underpowered. It's just not a big enough motor. We kind of knew that going in, but it was the only motor we could get in time, so we really didn't have a choice. It's 4 horsepower. I'm guessing we could use 7 or 10 horsepower on that boat and do great. So look forward to that. That's gonna come out eventually. We'll go down. I'll go down and tune that boat up with Jason, and we'll get it so that it actually runs really well. Other than that, I am super happy with that build. It was so fun to work with Jason, and I cannot wait for our next collaboration, which is definitely gonna happen. So let me know in the comments down below what you'd like to see us build next. And also big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thank you for allowing me to go down to Oregon. You're really the reason that I can do this stuff. So thanks so much. And if you want to join the Patreon, there's a link right here, and I'll catch you on the next one.
All right, let's put it on Craigslist.